How are you, folks? The Enzo Di Casanzo podcast. This is number 5. So the semester's taken off here. We started at St. Peter's in the last week in August, and NJCU we started a week ago. So we've had, I think, 2 weeks for NJCU. We've had we've had 2 meetings, right? Right, and actually, yes, it was 1, 2, just 2 so far. But the Rutgers days, we started after Labor Day, but the Jesuit way, they start before. So we're going to continue return on equity. So let's just get right to it. We stopped off here last time. What return on equity tells you, and we'll get through the discussion here. And again, this is, you're working on transactions. This is gonna matter. Being able to do this kind of an analysis, whether it's good or bad, right? Depends among the stock's peers, or in other words, the opportunity cost. Going back to the very basic economics, the opportunity cost. What other choices do you have to deploy capital? Which is the conversation we're having down in Florida all the time. Utilities have a lot of assets and debt on the balance sheet compared to a small amount of net income. A normal ROE for the utility sector could be 10% or less. Technology firms could have a little bit more. They have smaller balance sheets relative to net income and may have normal ROE levels 18% or more. So you're looking for the sector, that kind of a thing. If it's a technology company and it's 18% over the past couple years, compared to the average of its peers, which might be 15%, then obviously the target company is pretty good. You could conclude the TechCo's management is above average at using the assets. Really, what are you doing with ROE? You're using assets to create profits. That's what you're doing. Okay. Relatively high ROE or low may vary from one industry group or sector to another. A shortcut is to consider a return on equity near the long-term average of the S&P 500. And I think we discussed this in class, was about 13% as of the end of last year. And we could modernize that number a bit, but that's pretty good. Q4, I know it's 9 months ago, but it's not going to be that much different. An acceptable ratio, anything less than 10% is poor. Now, return on equity and stock performance. Now, I don't spend an enormous amount of time on sustainable growth rates because it really depends on the investment that you're looking at. But certainly the dividend model and how much the companies are going to grow are certainly important. What the dividends are and the appreciation of the change in the revenue, the appreciation of the change in the earnings. I always like to break it down to the accounting information. All of these sort of little buzzwords, the more I teach finance, ratio analysis and all these, these are just sort of, I hate to say shortcuts, but as I've deepened my knowledge of accounting into managerial accounting, you really have an appreciation for where the numbers come from. It's not so simple. Where these numbers come from. It's a lot of work to develop just revenue lines, just expense lines, and how you put a business together. Okay, it's extraordinarily important, and there's a lot of complexity to it. It's not simple. Okay, it's not simple. I'm just cleaning this up a little bit. Okay, there could be some challenges. ROE is a good starting place for developing future estimates of stock's growth rate and the growth rate. That's a little bit better. How the valuation is growing, how the earnings are growing. That's what you want to break it down to accounting. To estimate a company's future growth rate, multiply ROE by the company's retention rate. And again, it's a percentage of net income that's retained or reinvested in the company. So in other words, when you've got earnings, the earnings can go in 2 places generally. It can go back into the company or into the hands of the shareholder. The general rule is for a company that's sort of new, a lot of the earnings are going to go back to build the company instead of back into the hands of the shareholders. We looked at ROE. Now you have to be careful. This 21 and this 13, what the differences are. It says this is an average for the S&P 500, right? Near long-term average is about 13%. At a point in time, in 2022, at the end of 22, it was about 21%. That's a specific point in time. The 13% is an average over however many years. I don't know if they did 30 years or 50 years or 25 years or whatever it is that whoever computed that number, where they got their data from. Now, these ideas about sustainable growth rates, and again, you're going to care a lot about how revenues grow, how earnings grow, and how dividends grow. So there's 2 companies with identical ROEs and net incomes, but different retention ratios. They will have different sustainable growth rates. And okay, SGR is the rate a company can grow without having to borrow money to finance that growth. The formula for calculating SGR is ROE times the retention ratio, or times 1 minus the payout. Yeah, so it's payout plus retention ratio equals 1. I probably should have had that formula somewhere. This is just a very cookie cutter example where if the company has a return on equity of 15% and a retention ratio of 75%, and B has a return on equity of 15 but a 90% retention rate, company A has a sustainable growth rate of 10.5, and business B has a sustainable growth rate of 15. So let's look at these. Even though the ROEs are the same, it looks like for both of them, but the company B has a bigger retention ratio, so the projection is that the sustainable growth rate is going to be higher because you're reinvesting back into the company instead of just dispersing cash to the shareholders and maybe not being able to grow your company as much. That's what the logic is there. A stock that's growing at a slower rate than its sustainable rate could be undervalued, or the market may be accounting for key risks. In either case, the growth rate is thus a rate that is far above or below warrants additional investigation. Using return on equity to identify problems, it's reasonable to wonder why the average or slightly above average ROE is preferable rather than ROE that is double or triple, even higher than the average of its peer group. Aren't stocks with a very high ROE a better value? Well, that may not be so great because that means as a low number of equity, very high income, but how do you sustain that? Okay. Yeah. See, obviously, again, know your math, your basic math. This is basically net income divided by equity. So if this ROE is very high, you've got a very high income, but a very small equity. And again, how sustainable is that going to be? And here's some of the issues that you may. There's a couple here that we might want to look at. Excess debt, negative net income, which makes making some of these computations a little bit difficult. So really, in all the years that I've sort of transitioned over from being a math and physics and computer science guy into business, is you got to know your balance sheets and income statements and cash flow statements. All these ratios, you're going to certainly focus in on certain parts of those balance sheets and income statements, but my conversations have really been accounting equations, and I think some of these ratios, it can gloss over what you're really looking at. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. But certainly inconsistent profits, can play havoc with some of these ratios. If it's been unprofitable, you might even have retained losses, and the losses are a negative value and reduce the shareholder equity. Now the losses have a windfall in the most recent year and has returned to profitability. So somebody hit a home run in one of these companies. Now the denominator is now very small after a lot of years of losses, which makes the ROE very misleadingly high. So again, you have to know so what we're trying to say here is you got to know the behavior. So again, what's happened in this picture, the behavior of the accounting. What happened in this picture is there were a lot of losses. Then all of a sudden there was a big earning one year. And equity may have been small because the company was still growing. So then you might have a large net income, but if you look on the balance sheet, you've got a lot of losses. Okay, that have been or certainly no profits at all. So that's certainly something you want to be able to keep in mind. A second issue causes ROEs excess debt. A company's been borrowing aggressively. It can increase the ROE because equity is equal to assets minus debt. So if you've got a lot of debt, you're going to reduce that equity number. So the more debt a company has, the lower the equity can fall. So common scenario is when a company borrows large amounts of debt to buy back its own shares, that can inflate earnings. You reduce the number of shares, you're dividing it by a smaller number, so EPS looks bigger, but it may not affect the performance. Okay, so like I said, these ratios, it's bereft of, it's a minefield of things that could be a problem. Negative net income, negative shareholders' equity. Okay, these are also. You want to know what number. You don't want to just blindly plug in these numbers. You want to know what it is that you're plugging in. That's why if you can, I've been able to do pretty well with percentage changes and just a keen analysis of the accounting information without all these bells and whistles of these ratios. I'm not saying that they're bad, but you just got to be careful. A negative equity, or if shareholders' equity is negative, the issue could be excessive debt or inconsistent profitability. There's exceptions for companies that are profitable and have been using cash flow to buy back their own shares. For many companies, this is an alternative to paying dividends, and it can eventually reduce equity. Buybacks are subtracted from equity enough to turn the calculation negative, which could be. So if you're buying back stock, you're potentially artificially inflating earnings per share, and then you're certainly you're reducing your cash reserves by doing that, or you're certainly you potentially could be reducing retained earnings. So instead of paying a dividend and maintaining the same amount of equity in a sense, you're going to be reducing that equity by paying. And really, in both situations, if you're paying out cash to buy for dividends, or if you're doing share buybacks, the share buyback affects EPS. The dividend payout doesn't affect earnings per share as much. So that's just something to keep in mind. Negative or extremely high ROE levels should be considered a warning sign and worth investigating. Negative ROEs could be due to cash flow supported share programs or excellent management, in a sense, but that's less likely, and we'll have an example of that down the road. In any case, a company with a negative ROE can be evaluated against other stocks with positive ROEs and ratios. Well, I don't agree with that. Okay, I don't agree with that. Some limitations on this ratio. It may not always be positive. It can be very large, sort of accidentally somehow. Inconsistent profits, excessive debt. We already sort of looked at that. So big changes from one period to the next can be an indicator of inconsistent use of accounting methods, which again, it really boils down to how you recognize all the activities that make up the business. Negative ROE due to the company having a net loss or negative shareholders' equity cannot be used to analyze the company, nor can it be used to compare against companies with a positive ROE. The term ROE is a misnomer in this situation, as there's no return. The more appropriate classification considers is, why is there a loss? Why is there a negative equity? ROE can't be used to compare different companies in different industries. These things vary across specific sectors. Well, the sector is sort of the big picture. There's like 250 industries and maybe 30 sectors. Sectors are a little wider characterization. Their industries are within sectors. There's a bunch of industries that make up a sector. All the medicals and hospitals and pharmaceuticals and biotechs and all that stuff. Companies, especially as companies have different operating margins and financing structures. In addition, larger companies with greater efficiency may not be comparable to younger firms. As with all tools for investment analysis, it's just one of many available metrics that identify just one portion of the firm's overall financials. It's crucial to utilize a combination of financial metrics to get a full understanding of a company's financial health. Before investing. Now, we were playing around with this return on invested capital. I have the slot for it, but yeah, we have it here, I think. But I think it needs a little bit of, we use cash, short-term investments, debt. We had all of those in there. And we subtracted out, I think we subtract out the cash numbers. We had the equity number here. I think this is pretty good, though. I think it's pretty good. And I think we may have looked it up, and I don't recall if the 49, how close that was, but some of these other ones were close. Okay, some of these other ones were close. And there's some other numbers here. With this, we see what says equity to assets. And we're going to talk about leverages and equity multipliers down the road. But actually, what you're looking at here is what percentage of your assets are equity, what percentage of the assets are debt. So if equity is a small part of your assets, think of that. What's going to happen with this particular ratio? And again, assets equals debt plus shareholders' equity. So if this equity is small and assets are large, then a big ratio here means something, 3 or 4 or 5 times could mean most of the assets are made up with debt is what that means. So this one's going to be about 1 and a little bit. So we say equals assets divided by equity. It's now again, we have to format this. This is 184. Obviously, we don't want all those numbers. So you're going to go to number 2, center, all that. Okay. And then if you multiply this by 1 minus the tax rate, you'll get your 1. You can see this is like 184%. So this is about 168 is what that is. The debt to equity ratio, you could do percentages with this. You could say equals the liability numbers divided by the equity number. So you're about 81% of equity is debt. That makes sense, right? Because if you do the inverse of this thing, yeah, you're about 54 or so. But this is of assets, right? That's of assets. So yeah, that's okay. All right. So we added some other little, and we'll talk more about this as we go. Okay, we'll talk about more. And what I'll try to do, I'll try to keep everything clear in terms of what I'm doing here. Somebody made a comment that I cut the screen off. Somebody at NJCU made that comment, so which is good. So we'll take a look at what's going on. So. But that's where these come from: equity, liabilities. And again, this was our return on equity. Oops. So this, yeah, you got to be careful with this. It's not. Oh yeah, there's an extra piece being multiplied here, which we didn't want. So here, let's redo this. All right, it's not all those numbers. So it's this, comma, this, comma, that. There, it's better. Yeah, it's about 28. 28. So yeah, they're the same. I put that extra computation there, and it messed up the you're multiplying three other ratios. Earnings before taxes by sales, sales assets, and then assets equity times 1 minus the tax rate. This is big for the CFA exam. They seem to care a lot about this. ROE looks at how much profit a company can generate relative to the shareholders. Return on invested capital takes a calculation a couple of steps further. The purpose of ROIC is to figure out the amount of money after dividends a company makes based on all of the sources of capital, shareholders' equity, debt. So it's not just all the liabilities, just the debt numbers, and also sorting through that liability section and what is debt, what is the debt that you use for these ratios is a lot of the times the big challenge. ROE looks at how well a company uses shareholders' equity, while ROIC is meant to determine how well the company is using all of the available capital. This is just how well the company is using shareholders' equity is what you care about here, and the ROIC is all the capital. All right. And actually, I keep adding to this reading list, so I'll be posting some assignments pretty soon. They'll be due the end of September, so you'll have a good 2 weeks to work on it. Okay, maybe tomorrow or Monday or something like that, but they'll be due like the 29th or something like that. And now these are just some examples here: Amazon, Google, Apple. They're industry leaders, and we pulled out a couple of some of the data. The beginning and the ending shareholders' equity, the average shareholders' equity, the net income, and then we have the formulas here. Some of them, Amazon had a negative because I think they had a negative income one of the years that we looked at. Yeah, so the formula is there, and here's the numbers. So obviously, Apple's was very large for some reason. It had a big income, and again, but it's not an oil and gas producer, so it doesn't have dramatic assets. Okay, so that's why you had a. So here, there's a sort of a normal ROE, a negative ROE, and then an oversized ROE. And if these are all big companies, obviously Alphabet, Amazon, and Apple. Okay, and this is just sort of on as an example here. Beginning and ending shareholders, when you look at the income statement, and we worked on it here. The beginning for 2022. Right, the beginning equity would be the end of 2021, and the ending equity would be the end of 2022. So the beginning is 30 billion, the ending is 44. You can take an average, whatever that is, 38 or 35 or something like that, right? That's and I think we computed ROE in that vein using averages. It was a little bit bigger, right? Because you average these two instead of the 44. So you had whatever you had in terms of an average. What is that? That's 74 divided by 2, right? Equals 74 divided by 2. And 37 billion, as opposed to 44 billion. Okay, which looking at this, because this was small. You had a smaller denominator here, so you had a bigger ratio. Yeah. Okay. But these, we didn't, I'm saying these are just on paper. We didn't really compute these, but we computed the Tesla one. I don't want to go bananas with all these other examples. This is not an accounting class. Okay. We're just discussing the general idea of this. Again, if you, and again, like me, where, okay, fine. I do work for a large firm, but what we do is very compartmentalized. It's so we work sort of separate from every, so I don't really have access to all the economists and all the all the infrastructure. I really don't. We're sort of nestled, and that's on purpose. We're sort of nestled away, doing our own set of projects, which I like. I don't mind working like that. I don't need an army to speak to the army every day. I really don't. But so I don't go to other. I don't have really access to other analysts, and that's by design. Where I'm not influenced, and it's good. The people who run the company are very smart. I'm not influencing somebody else, in a sense, with my opinion, because I'm being always being told I'm very influential for whatever that means. But so you keep your your opinion to sort of your projects. Okay. Now we have the formula here: net income divided by shareholders' equity. We have that formula right there. Then it says how to use Microsoft Excel. And this one's a specific example. Yeah, this one's a specific example of how to use Excel, but we already know how to, we already sort of did this already. And this just goes through the steps, clicking on the cells and what to do, how to make a formula in the cells, which is nice. You guys, if you need to read through this, but I've already explained how to do all this. Now the DuPont analysis is sort of the big ending piece. You can see that there's a lot of notes on ROE, so it's on purpose. That this is obviously this is important. It's not just a couple lines. The DuPont analysis arose, and I've learned this. I learned this early on as an analyst. That sure, you work for an investment bank, you work for a research provider, but really the people who know semiconductors, the people who know the computer industries, people who know telecommunications, work for Intel, work for IBM, work for Apple, work for AT&T, or whatever it might be. Those are the people that really know it. So this can be easily computed by dividing net income by shareholders' equity. There's a DuPont composition or decomposition that can break it down into a couple different ratios. And this was created a long time ago, 100 years ago. And there's the version is here. Net profit margin, asset turnover, and equity multiplier. We'll have a specific discussion on equity multipliers, net profit margin, a measure of operating efficiency, a measure of asset use efficiency, and a measure of financial leverage. So, and again, looking through this, just sort of, again, I have it in two places, which is fine, I suppose, right? The formula is there. So it's a little more of a complicated set of steps. And then break it down even further: earnings before taxes over sales, sales over assets, assets over equity, and then times 1 minus the tax rate. So there's a couple steps in the equations. It gives a deeper understanding and what you're really examining, what you're really how you're really analyzing how the company works. Instead of just looking at one simple ratio, now you're looking at the following: leverage, operating efficiency, asset use efficiency, and you can measure that, and you can have those time lined out, just like I have them here. Where are they? Right here. You can look at, and actually what we should do is measure of operating efficiency, net profit margin, equity multiplier. How am I going to do that? The multiplier is the financial leverage. like that. Measure of asset use efficiency is that. That's you could go with measure of operating efficiency with this thing. And then the last thing here, this is measure of financial leverage. Okay, so we got a couple of new notes on this. And actually what I'll do for you guys on the master file, do I still have the master file somewhere? Yeah. So again, when we upload, so we have some new pieces to this. We have the Buffett stuff that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later today. How to make that graph. We'll work on that. Okay. Okay. And then there's a description here, and you should be, anytime you do an analysis, you want to be able to describe what you're talking about, right? So instead the stuff simple ratio with financial statements, examine the history and the competitors' history, peer companies, that kind of a thing. And it says with ROE, it says if it's lower because creditors perceive the company as riskier and charge at higher interest rates, the company is poorly managed and has leverage that's too low, or the company has higher costs that decrease the operating profit margins. So it gives you 3 more ratios to you can analyze how the profit margins are doing, how the leverage is doing, if the interest rate situation, the credit rating situation. Okay, and that you can see what the impact of that is on ROE, because you can see we had one computation where it was relatively simple, just dividing 2 numbers, and this one is the product of 3 numbers, okay, which is a little more complicated. Okay, there's a couple questions here. It says, what's a good ROE? So with most performance metrics, what counts as good will depend on the company's industry and competitors. The long-term ROE for the top 10 S&P 500 companies have averaged around 18%. Specific industries can be higher or lower. Ultimately, equal industry will likely have a lower average ROE if it is highly competitive and requires substantial assets in order to generate revenue. On the other hand, industries with relatively few players where only limited assets are needed to generate revenue may show a higher ROE. So, yeah, so it depends on, again, if you're an integrated oil producer, if you're Coca-Cola, or if you're Apple Computer, and again, or bank. And Warren Buffett owns all of those, so he knows, which ROE is appropriate for which industry and which investment that he's going to make, and then also he doesn't compare Coke. I mean, he may look at Cokes and Apple or Bank of America or something like that, but he's going to do it relative to other soft drink makers, other integrated oil and gas companies, other banks. How do you calculate it? It's the average shareholder's net income divided by the average shareholder's equity. Equity is assets minus liability. It's a measure of the return generated on net assets of the company. Since the equity figures can fluctuate during the accounting period in question, the average shareholders is used. Make the comparison of ROA and ROE. This is return on assets versus return on equity. This is net income to assets alone. ROE is net income compared to net assets of the company. This is net income to assets by themselves. They both gauge how efficiently a company generates profits, but one is relative to assets and one is relative to equity. Which operations require significant assets will likely show a lower average return. If a company's ROE is negative, it means that there was a negative net income for the period in question. This implies that shareholders are losing on their investment in the company. For new and growing companies, a negative ROE is often to be expected. If negative persists, it can be a sign of trouble. What causes, obviously, just mathematically, more income or smaller equity can boost ROE. Paying back debt is sort of a way to decrease the liability part of this. So if you're decreasing the liability part of this, then this is has a smaller number subtracted from it. So obviously this is going to be a bigger number. So again, so how good your math is how you really need to look at this. More liabilities, obviously, you're going to make equity decline, and you can artificially boost ROE with a smaller denominator, which it talks about here, without necessarily increasing profitability. Okay, you want to be careful that you don't amplify some of these ratios by too much debt or share buybacks or something like that. And putting a fork in this, finally, it says the return on equity is common financial metric and compares how much income a company made compared to total shareholders' equity. Another useful calculation is return on average equity. ROE and ROAE can tell you how well a company is using resources to generate profit. It does not consider a company's entire financing structure. Okay. So yeah, you got a good. This is a good, and you're looking for the structure, industry, financing structure, what industry it participates in, the performance against competition. It's not as simple as this ROE is good and this ROE. It's not like a speed limit where either you're breaking the speed limit or you're not. Okay, it's not really like that. Okay, the sixth video we're gonna go over maybe the dividend yield. I think we should put that in there. I have the Buffett article and dividend. We'll make that a long, probably tomorrow. I'll cut that video. How long is dividend yield? It's another large set of notes here. Then we have financial stability, and we have all this stuff. But we're still working on these notes. That's why it's still under construction, right? Which is good. I mean, it's good that you have something where it you're still putting it together. So, but there you go. So there's return on equity. We use this. Okay, this is not just something to fill up time or whatever. This is it's an important measure of deciding what to invest in, and it's something that I'm working on in a real job and real transactions and real investments. Okay, so hopefully that's going to help you. All right, we did that. So what I said in the notes, and I think I have it up here. So actually, looking at this, we can do this another time. We already kind of messed with this, a little bit. We sort of filled in some expanded ratios here, debt to equity, and things of that nature. Okay, so you want to look at and really what it is. It's liabilities to equity, is what that is. Okay, so yeah, so you need to have, if your liabilities and equity are comparable, you got to have some pretty good assets to support that. Because think of the equation: this number equals these two, right? With the accounting equation. So, and what you can do, or we can do. And this is going to work, so don't worry about it. But so it's going to be equal to liabilities plus equity. And the reason it's off a bit is that there was some non-controlling something in there. You can see they're all pretty close, but there were some other non-controlling numbers in there or something. So you can just, this is just testing. There's just some other, again, when you're dealing with real numbers, it's not always going to be exact. Yeah, so not so pronounced. We're just kind of testing that out a bit. That's really what that is. There it is. Okay. Actually, I'm curious now. I opened up the financial statement for Tesla. Yeah, see, there's non-controlling subsidiary here. And with the asset number, what happened with the asset number? 82338. Okay. We have 82338. Liabilities 3644. And then here, so there's non-controlling here. There's non-controlling here. So that's your $1 billion off or thereabouts. All right. So you can see this one. It's the non-control. And what we're gonna specifically discuss. Actually, I'm putting that on the list here also. Non-controlling. Well, I don't know about tomorrow, but we'll see what happens. Okay, and we'll sort of look at that together. All right. Okay, let's get to some corporate finance now. Warren Buffett, and I think we discussed this somewhere, and we're going to we have another article tomorrow. Again, tomorrow's lecture. Tomorrow's lecture is going to be dividend yield. The next Buffett article, and this example, but just for American Express, and actually somebody in one of my classes is applying to American Express, and I don't know if I had something to. Hopefully, I don't know if I had something to do with it or not. But we discussed this in a previous lecture, where he bought 400 million shares, 1.3 billion, or 13,000 million, might be the better word, right? Or another way to say that, right? 13,000 million, which are right there. Okay, and he got a specific dividend, is what he got. So the yield is what your dividend is divided by the price you paid for the shares. And that came out to 5.77. And I think we discussed that. So I'm looking here. We're going to look at growth rates. We're going to do that. And he bought these shares in 94. Okay. And that equity. Yeah, this was the end. We said this is the end of 94. The start of 94. And how the equity changed. This is 25 billion. So 25 billion or 25,000 million. So you have those sort of endpoints of this. So you started with 1,300. I think we did it like that. And if you guys don't mind, let me just check. Yeah. Okay. So they are 13 and 75 is where we started with this. And this was 75 million in dividends. Okay. And directly from that, we can compute the yield. You're 75 million divided by 1.3 billion. Okay. And then we have this combined piece. We'll get to this, but this is just the yield. And this formula, I can just take this all the way down. So as we're doing this, even though this says dividend 0, but it'll just keep computing the ratio of cash dividend to the Coca-Cola equity. KO is the stock symbol of Coca-Cola. Let's just make sure of that. KO. Okay. And here, do we have a yield? The yield's probably lower, right? The yield's probably, and see, this is Buffett's yield also. You got to keep that in mind. This is Buffett yield, what Buffett is getting. This is not everyone's computation. These are his computations for his ownership piece. It's about 3%. So it's and we talked about this, that this was lower, right? It's about 3%. Okay, about 3. And let's see where we are with this. So this is 577. And this thing was end of 94. So this grew towards 25. Right? 25 billion is what this thing grew towards. Or 25,000 million, 25 billion. You could look at the X of that, and we'll do that in a second. And in terms of the years, you're talking, well, yeah, if you're at the end here, so 1 year would be 95. So yeah, this would be 28 years, because you're talking, let's say it's December 94, and this is December 2022. So 95 is a whole year to work, 96. So yeah, that's why you have 28 years is what you got. So the rate, and so remember we did the math here with this? Yeah, this is the yield. This is the initial yield. This is 577, and then it's a little bit bigger as you go through. This one is 577 is the initial one. So let's look at the growth rate of the equity. So just plugging it into these formulas, and again, remember this future equals present times 1 plus r to the t power, and then I did all this math previously. If you understand what I did here, that's great. But really, solving this thing for r, it's a little bit of a complicated looking sort of solution to solving, because there's 4 variables in one equation. But if we know the other 3, we can solve for the r. So if you solve without, and you're not gonna be tested on deriving this or anything like that. But the growth rate for, and actually what we probably should do here, let's do center. It looks better like that. Equals -1 plus exponential parenthesis 1 divided by all the years, so the 28th year. Close this. And then you're going to have the final numbers 25,000, or 25 billion divided by 1.3 billion. There you go. Yeah, so this thing is going to be moving at 11.4. Yeah, 11.4. Okay, for the 28 years. Because again, this is the end of 94. So all of 95, all of 96, all of 97. Right? That's how you're counting those numbers. And then up to, so that's how you get 28 years. So you don't necessarily, this is going to turn into 25, but you don't necessarily need to put that there just yet. Because now what you're going to do, you're going to say equals, arrow up, 1300, shift 8 for multiplication, 1 plus this rate, click on 1 plus that rate, hit F4, and close that. So what you'll do is you'll take the previous reading, the previous projection, and multiply by 1 plus 11%. So the previous equity projection times 1.11 every time. Now you have 1.4 billion, 1.6 billion, 1.7, and you can go, and what you're supposed to arrive at is 25 at the end. There's your 25 billion. By a couple billion every year. It's changed. The X would be what you arrived at versus what you started with. So you're 19.23 times. Okay, so the investment is not, but again, over 28 years, but still, it's 19 times or 20 times. So it's pretty good. Same thing with the dividend. We're at 75, and then we got to 104. So what we'll do is we'll just right click here, and we'll say this is 704. This is 75. And we'll go with this. There's you want this, the 28th year 28. And actually what we could have done with that, we could have locked in the column. So when you brought it across, it would have stated V. We locked in that column right there. So yeah, so now, and the dividend's not moving as much. Okay, so this is going to be that one. And with the column, you don't need it like that. So copy. So now the way I set this up is we can just do this. Control R. There you go. Okay. That's your new dividend. Yeah, 81 to 704. So it's my part of 75 to, yeah. Okay. And now the yield gets computed. See all the yields? Dividend over equity. And here, let's compare Warren Buffett's. Yeah, about 2.8. Buffett's at 2.8 or so. Our sort of very rough computation. And the dividend yield, the trailing is 3, forward is about 3. So yeah, you're in the neighborhood. So you're pretty good. You're pretty good. Okay. So you're comparing that to Yahoo Finance. And this is just, again, the ratio of where you started versus where you ended, or where you ended versus where you started. So his dividends are up about 10 times. His equities are up about 20 times. And this change, how do we do that? Yeah. The change in equity, this is just simply, and this is very, very small. This is very small. So you can say equals where you ended up versus where you started, which is almost laughable at this point. Right? So that's about 23. He made about, in terms of equity, made about 23 billion in equity. Okay, that's what over 28 years. There's just the nominal difference, not inflation adjusted or anything like that. That's just the nominal difference. And you're right. You definitely want to do in 1994 dollars and 2022 dollars, and but that's it. And that's the nominal number. If that's what it's worth today, that's the nominal. So that number is supposed to include the value. The value of the price is supposed to include everything. But if you want to say, hey, what was this? And I'm not going to get into that right now. But what was it in '94? What's 23 billion in '94? It would be less. What you would do is you would take the 23. You could do something like this, equals this divided by parenthesis 1 plus, let's say 2% to the 28th power, something like that. Whoops. Yeah. So that's like having it's still about 10 times. It's about 13 billion. If you do it's like a 2% inflation adjustment for that. So it's worth what 13 billion was worth in 28 years ago. For what that's worth. But there's people at the Federal Reserve will love all that for whatever that's worth. But this is the number in your bank. Your bank account's not going to show 13 billion. It's going to show 23 or 25. Okay. And now with the dividends, you can do the times. With the dividends, this is not a difference. You're going to sum these. I said this in class. He collected these things every year. Every year he collected this. How do you not want to learn about this stuff? Folks, that's $8 billion. I'm showing you how he made 8 billion. That's what I'm showing, okay? And the thought process behind it. I think that's valuable to explain to you guys. Right? This other number, well, this is from 0. So let's see, the total return. Yeah, I mean, right. The total return is going to be from 95, not from 0, right? So you don't really need this. This is going to be equal to parenthesis. You picked up, I mean, you could make the argument to use a 75, but I'm not going to do that. This minus your 13 divided by, see how I did this? If I took the new equity valuation plus the dividend, subtracted the original price because you didn't pay the 75. I mean, you could play some games with that 75. You could subtract it out if you want. I mean, you could potentially do that because that means you got them. But let's keep that complication. That's 75 billion. 75 million is just free money. Yeah, that 75 million is that's just free. Yeah, that's all just free. So let's just keep it like that. Yeah, that 75 was just some sort of free. I mean, what you could do is you could connect it to the 81 if you want, and we could see how that's different. But you hit return, you made about 17%, and you see that's just for the first one. So for the second one, it will be 17.2. Right. So this is this because you already counted for this 81. But another way you could do this, you could say plus 75. Well, see, it skews it a bit. So we're just gonna leave that as sort of free money. And again, you've got to make the choice here. So Buffett's return, so you include dividends, his equity appreciation, and the dividend he got at the end of the year, for about 14%, 15%. You can take an average of this. Okay. Or another way you could do this, you could subtract out that you got this like maybe as a discount. Yeah, but see, it skews the numbers because it's sort of an oddball sort of starting point here. But just leave it like this. And especially with the way we modeled it. We modeled it that he paid the 1,300 or the 1.3 billion, and they got the 75 million the next day. The way this is modeled, that's sort of how it's modeled. Yeah, leave it like that. Again, we have to make artistic decisions. I made that artistic decision to look at it that way. And then the total return equals parenthesis this plus that, right? The dividend, the new equity value minus the 1.3 divided by the 1.3. Yeah, that's almost 2,000%. Hey, why is this different? Divided by 1.3, fine. That's the delta plus this. Yeah, that should be that. These should be the same. I don't know why they're not the same. This is 23. Let's look back what we did here. Oh, I'm sorry. What am I doing here? That's what's wrong. So there you go. There it is. So it's this plus this minus that. Is this everything here? Yeah. So it's off a bit. I don't know why, but that's 2458, and this thing is 2358 somehow. Yeah, minus what you paid. Yeah. You know what it is? I think we took, you know what it is, because there's more precision with these numbers. I think that's basically what it is. Yeah. So it's fine. It's fine. We're good. Okay. But there you go. Okay. So that's how you do this. So it's over 2,000% change. Good enough. Good enough. All right. I have the graphs here, and we'll go through how to make the graphs, but just to sort of talk about them for a second here. The cash dividend increases. So if you graph this, which we did, you actually what's going on here is it's not showing you. It's showing the graph from the other thing. So, but here, just discussing it. Obviously, this is the cash dividend. The cash dividend gets bigger over time. Okay, the cash dividend gets bigger over time for Coca-Cola Company. And you want to label things in colors. If you have the company's colors, you can always work with that. And this thing, the yield declines. And we just looked this up. The yield is about about 3% or so. And that's about where, if you look at the overall company, that's where you look. That's where the yield looks. That's where you look for the yield there. Okay, so we did a dividend yield percentage and a cash dividend. So what we'll do, and I'll delete these eventually. But what we're going to do is we'll do cash dividend, which is here. Highlight the whole thing. Insert. Scatter. Curve. I could do curve. And drop it off right in there. Title. Cola. Company. Make the font red. Do that, something like that. Whoops. Okay, you want your work to look good. Click on the graph. You want to go to click on this. Select, edit, X 94 to 02. This is cash dividend, US dollars. Okay. Now with the years, you can play some kind of games with this. You can do every year. Right click, format. I don't want this. Minus 75 degrees, the custom angle. The font to 8, something like that. Okay, there they go. There it is. You can see them a little bit better. Okay, you could even do this format. Okay, so there you go. So you have every year that you want to look at. You can right click on the grid line, format the grid line, solid, dash. Okay. It doesn't need to be orange. It could be a nice gray. Format the grid line. But this thing will do an outline, almost the darkest, but there you go. Oops. All right, so you have an outline around it. Add titles. Yeah, we did two titles. We did that. This is years, and this is US dollars. Millions. And you could always make these a little bit smaller with the font. 8 is good enough. Okay. And you want to do legend top. Okay, it's cash dividend. All right, but there you go. That's what the cash dividend looks like. You could put the little placeholders in if you want. You could do something like that. Okay, but this is just to remind me what we were doing here, so get rid of that. Now this one matches. When you click on it, see how it highlights? This is the X. This is your X-axis. This is your Y-axis. That matters. You got to know what an axis is. You got to know. Okay. And the other version of this, that was cash dividend, and we'll do copy. We'll do paste. And we'll do right-click, select data. We'll add. This is the yield. Oops. There's X. Here's your yield. And this is get rid of that. And there. And the nice thing about this is you have the formatting and all that stuff. Just change some titles, percentage. That. That. That goes right there. Okay. Get rid of this. And what you could do to make this a little more pronounced is have the minimum here be 2%. Like that. See? You get a little more of a pronounced movement. Yeah, and you don't have to do grid lines, outline the graph anymore. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Okay. So you can see the yield goes down, and the reason why is the equity changes more than the dividend. Okay. And this is just Buffett's. Okay. This is not the whole company or some other shareholder. This is just how he's doing. All right. And there it is. Okay. So this is all, and we're going to do nothing. We'll do American Express version of this. I think I have that somewhere here. Yeah, there's American, and we'll do that next time, and maybe even look at what American Express is, because somebody in classes is dealing with that. We can look at the different parts of the company and the credit divisions and what have you. Okay, but there you go. All right, so you had return on equity. We talked about Warren Buffett a little bit, and again, a guy who's got this kind of success. I don't think it's a bad use of our time to discuss, what we're doing in here with this guy. But yeah, that's it. All right, so we knocked out ROE, we knocked out Warren Buffett, and the next time will be another Buffett article, dividend yield, and then American Express, and not in the non-controlling interest or something like that. Yeah, and actually, what I did this weekend, I worked on the, and hopefully you're excited about this. I worked on the macro models. I worked on the receipts and expenditures for the taxes. So, America, we give away as a government, we give away more money than a little bit more, a couple $100 billion more, or maybe it's tens of billions more, but it's more than we spend on just expenditures, just on buying like fire trucks and manhole covers and desks and things like that, phones for the employees in the various levels of government across America. So we give more money away than we used to buy than on capital expenditures. How about that, folks? Thank you. We'll see you soon.